So last but not least, today we have some really great, more great artists and producers actually, to talk about sonic hooks, to talk about their creative process. And I want to introduce somebody from the Native Instruments squad, Carmen Rizzo, himself a Grammy-nominated producer, but also our artist relation manager, who's going to lead this panel and introduce the artists. So Carmen, welcome.
Do I get a microphone?
Well, I'll just give you this one for now.
Hello, thanks for coming. Thanks, Constantine. You want me to sit there or there?
You sit there.
Okay, don't matter. So we have a couple of wonderful guests with us tonight, which we'll introduce right now. We've got Kimbra, come on out, and we've got Brenmar. So welcome. Let's give them a big round of applause. Oops. All right. So we've got some heavy hitters up here. I want to give a shout out. Whoops. To Matab over there in the back, who's done a great job, who's put this event on from Native Instruments. So big ups for organizing this. We all flew out last night from Los Angeles, so let's get to it. So here we go.
What up, what up?
Yeah, this is a good story. We're gonna ease into some good things, but Brenmar actually remixed a track for Kimbra.
Yeah, a few years ago. Settle Down. Yeah, Settle Down. 2012, maybe, I think. I moved out to LA. I'm from Chicago, but I've been out in New York for about 7 and a few months, like 7 years and a few months. But I moved out to LA for a little bit, and I remember remixing that, and I had like a little home studio set up, like in the corner, bootleg as hell, but I was working on that remix for a little bit. The vocals were amazing on it. I come from a remix background, so I like to, that's really where my strength is. I have a good ear for knowing what I like and rearranging it, and you gave me so much to work with on that song. That was cool.
Thanks, man.
Because it was a little outside of my usual kind of stuff that I would pick to remix, but.
So yeah. it's sort of come full circle.
Yeah,
so we're
So we're finally meeting.
Yeah, for real.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about a signature sound. Maybe we'll start with you, Kimbra. Can you name a record that really changed you in your sound, that made you want to come up with your own sound? Is there one record?
Well, of course, there's never one record, because all of us can think of about 5 that were really definitive in our journeys. I grew up, in the 90s, and I had Timbaland records that were inspiring me, Amy Winehouse jazz, Björk, of course, even Nine Inch Nails, The Fragile was a huge record for me sonically. But I want to talk about one in particular, because you guys might not have heard of him. He's a Japanese producer called Cornelius. And if you really want some incredible inspiration sonically, I recommend listening to a record of his called Sensuous. Now, this was an album I put on headphones and became so transported by the way he took essentially organic samples. Everything sounded very tactile, so raindrops, typewriter clicks, sounds in nature, very, open-mic'd acoustic guitars, but he treated them in a way that was like a house record or very, very glitch-focused, so everything was cut up, quite mathematical. And, for me, it was like making pop songs. I was so inspired by this idea of productions that could take from so many organic places, which is what I love, to feel the texture of things, but run them through these filters and these sort of, techniques that made them feel extremely syncopated and rhythmic and soulful. And I don't know. That for me was a standout record that made me think, wow, the options are limitless here with what you can do in production.
So it was what he did that helped kind of inspire you, not just a lead line or some.
He would introduce this one sound like a raindrop, just. And then drop like a slap bass out of nowhere in this, in the in-between moments. But leave all these, perfect silences and just keep building the track as if it was like, in a club. You're just dropping a hi-hat here and then you're bringing in the beat. Because doing it with these such strange elements. And then eventually the song would drop and he sings in Japanese, so it's very ethereal. And, although it's very clinical the way he does it, there was something so soulful and lush because of the sounds he chose to use. And it was transporting because you couldn't think of any direct reference of what it was such an amalgamation, a collage way of making pop music. Yeah.
That's great. Okay, Brenmar, what about you?
I don't really have a song. I grew up in Chicago. I was a hip hop head for a long time. That was kind of like that's what I fell in love with. And growing up in Chicago, especially in the 90s also, it was like Chicago is the birthplace of house, right? So like I got into ghetto house because that was sort of, I remember going to house parties and listening to DJ Dion, DJ Funk, Gatman. I knew what house was before I even knew it was called house. It was like they'd play Madonna and then they'd play Percolator right after on the radio. Like that was real common in Chicago. It was pop music in Chicago. I still think about all of those producers when I sit down to make. So for those that don't know, I make party music. I make club music. I'm a DJ as well as a producer. So like 808s and crispy snares and like vocal samples, like that's really what I get excited about. And these guys were able to make DJ Funk like sometimes their tracks solely consist of like a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, maybe like 3 words, and a bass line. That's it, you know. And I can still play those songs now in the clubs and they get an amazing reaction. So that to me is like, there's something beautiful about that. Less is more almost. So I'm always kind of thinking about those like old school Chicago ghetto house guys. Timbaland, the Neptunes, like we're gonna be in debt to those guys for years. Like there's no escaping it. I don't like, still, you know, like if I'm going through a sample pack or something and there's a little sound that makes me think of Timbaland, I'm like, oh, sick. Yuck. Like, I'll grab it. You know, it's like almost like, that's cool. Like it's like that's an influence. I can't really think of a particular song. More so like growing up in Chicago and hip hop. I've gone into like free jazz and noise and indie rock and punk. I was in a band for a couple years. That's why I moved to New York originally even. So I've gone through all these different cycles, kind of came back around in a way to what I originally fell in love with, which was DJing and like hip hop and party music. There wasn't enough girls at these like noise rock shows. I'm not gonna lie, like that got old real fast. That was like, and which kind of going back to some of my earliest memories of listening to like falling in love with like ghetto house was like, that was the first time a girl ever like grinded up on me at a house party, was listening to like DJ Dion and like that kind of stuff, Gatman mixtapes. So there's like, yeah, I don't know, I'm always, I guess like, Chicago ghetto house, Timbaland's, Neptune, stuff like that.
I think we can all be jealous of growing up in a city where they play DJ Funk on the radio.
I swear to God, I used to talk about juke. So you have ghetto house. You got Chicago house in the late 80s, early 90s. It kind of turned into ghetto house. The classic house style never went anywhere. It just kind of branched off. And then it got a little faster. In the late 90s, it became juke. And then it got really fast, 160 BPM, and it became footwork. It's always had an associated dance style. Like, it's very super cool. But I grew up like on juke primarily late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember coming to New York or going on tour initially and like talking about juke and some of these DJs, and most people, and I don't know, maybe some of you guys might know now, might still not know, but like no one knew what the hell juke was. I had to explain it all the time. And I remember just like thinking like, I don't know, I never not knew what juke was, you know, kind of growing up. So when I had to explain it, it was like, oh yeah, this is so regional, like crazy.
It's kind of before YouTube was around, I guess.
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. Like, totally everything, everyone has access to everything, but like, there's still regional music, man, and regional sounds and regional hip hop hits, and like that don't leave their cities. And I see it all the time on tour, and it's awesome that even with the internet.
But I think that's been around since the beginning, like wherever you live. Let's talk about individually your own sound once you've been inspired by this. Do you guys start with beats or with melody? Like when Con and I interviewed 40, who's Drake's producer, he was saying that he generally doesn't start on beats. He starts with a melody and goes the other way around. Maybe you guys can explain how you create your own sound.
Yeah. So I'm from New Zealand, and talking of music that doesn't leave the town, or it's a really long way away. And our native people in New Zealand are Māori, and they have really rhythmic acoustic guitar music. So my first instrument is guitar, and I started off writing really melodic singer-songwriter type stuff until I started listening to actually a lot of heavy metal in high school and electronic artists that were inspiring me with syncopation and rhythm a lot more. At the same time, learning guitar and being really interested in the percussive nature of what that instrument could be, the tribal music. did a lot of heavy strumming. So that became my point of inspiration to write music. This early song of mine is a song called Settle Down that you did remix, yeah. And this started with just the use of percussive vocals. Limitation always breeds creativity, so I had very little at the time, a little 8-track, and I knew the drum beat that I heard, so I just fleshed it out on these 8 tracks that I had on the Boss tape machine, and it wasn't a tape machine, it sent out a little CD at the time, and then I put that up on MySpace. And but I guess the point is, rhythm was my entry point to writing. That was, the thing that got me. It's a primal thing that we're talking about, that, okay, and you kind of hear in between where you want to go in the beat. As a vocalist, that's what excites me, is bouncing off something rhythmically.
Finding those flows, kind of.
Finding the feel that you want to sit inside. From that point, then melody will develop. But for me, as a vocalist, or as a vocals are the key to my music. I have to be able to close my eyes and see an image. So this is why production. I mean, obviously, so many people are just like, it's just about the song. Don't worry about the production. I'm like, I agree to a point, but when you're writing music, you have to be able to close your eyes. For those of you who are lyricists or singers, and be able to see something that inspires you to go into a world and follow that inspiration somewhere. So that's why and we're here tonight to talk about some of the native instruments, machines, and our process. But so much of it is about creating a sound world that's inspiring to write on top of. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And so for me, to answer your question, it's often rhythm, just because that'll give me something to move to, and then melody will follow on out of feeling an inspiration from the beat. Yeah.
I think in these days you can't just get by with just any old rhythm, right? Because everybody can make beats, everybody has sounds, and you have to really kind of be on point. If you're just, if you're gonna do beats, it has to be good. Totally. So what about you, Brenmar?
What's the question? What I start with?
Yeah, like do you start with beats or do you start with melody, and how do you come up with your sound?
My strong suit is like drums, bass, samples, kind of flipping all that, because I come from a hip hop, I've come to learn about music and the theory behind it and all that after the fact. Still learning all the time. But honestly, it starts different all the time. And I kind of like that. Sometimes I have, I open up Ableton and I got my stock drum kit set up. Sure. But I don't always necessarily go to that first, because sometimes I have a melodic idea or a sample or something I want to flip, or it kind of, sometimes I don't, and sometimes I start just throwing drums. Honestly, sometimes I'll have a kick on the 1 and a snare on the 2 and the 4, like super basic, just to keep time. I've been trying to set my musicality game up, so I've been actually diving into that first. At the end of the day, if you have a good chord progression and a good melody, sound design is almost like the sprinkles on top. You know what I'm saying? You can't polish up a turd. If you got a boring melody, even the best sound design in the world will only end up with a pretty cool melody, maybe at the best. Like a good. So honestly, I'll have a really basic. I'll start now. I've been starting with a really basic drum pattern, like the most basic, boring drum pattern, but something to help me just keep a beat, and a stock piano sound, and I'll just start kind of in a very boring, but try to write music like that. Been kind of pushing myself in that sense, but not always. Sometimes I come in with a sample, and
I mean,
that takes the
you
lead.
also work a lot with vocalists, right?
All the time.
So and then that plays a huge part in your songs, right? I mean, some of the biggest songs are made through that vocal as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's been a learning process too. I came from a remix background. That's how I kind of got my foot in the door, was making remixes. That's why people were responding to my remixes. So I just kept doing more remixes. And it's one thing when you have a little beat that you put together in a couple hours or something, and then you throw a Beyonce a cappella on top. Sounds pretty good, because Beyonce sounds pretty good. You know what I mean? It's already the song's almost done. Just Beyonce took it there. But good luck finding a Beyonce to get into the studio with. You know what I'm saying? It's a whole nother animal when you're trying to make original songs from scratch. And it's been really hard, but in a really good, exciting way. But when you have an open, empty template that you have to start with, it's okay, what do I start with?
But when you guys talk about sound, and we talked about this downstairs, where's your thing about the factory sounds versus your custom sounds? Because like we talked about earlier with the NI stuff, the sounds are almost like too good in a funny way. Like not all of the manufacturers have, let's say, great sounds out of the box,
Nope.
right? So with, let's say, Machine, you've got a huge, jump forward, right? So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about factory sounds versus your custom sounds, where you draw the line. Is it okay to use the factory sounds? I mean, I find myself going to factory sounds with Machine because they're so close to some of my own sounds that
totally.
it's fine, right? So maybe we can talk about it.
Yeah, I'm a little different to a lot of the DJs I meet who work. Well, no, you did talk about using audio and waveform and what you do, but I didn't start out doing a lot of MIDI and battery, and I program beats with just waveform. So importing in a sample that I liked from an MP3, from a song, or something I record on my iPhone, and then working with pitching drums or creating a drum beat in Pro Tools, just having that visualization of seeing the waveform.
All audio,
yeah,
basically.
everything
right.
in audio. Then MIDI might come to sprinkle on top of that. But even the way I use Machine is to write a beat within it and then bounce the audio
That's
and
what I do,
manipulate
too.
the audio from
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
Because then you have that ability to time stretch, pitch shift, give it your own spin. But the factory presets you load up from the start are already so inspiring, and you can work with them and be, totally not having to sit there tweaking and queuing for ages while you're writing the beat. They sound sick. But then you have the option to import them in, have them in the session visually, and start to, I'm a big fan of being able to visualize. MIDI for me, it gets a little block focus. I just love to see a moving piece. So that's kind of how I love to use it. And I would totally vote for the presets, I think. And I will say as well, you've been using the studio recently, and the ability to go through and rate all the sounds that you love and have it so easy to kind of curate your favorites, that's really helpful. There's nothing worse than trying to write a song and trying to find the things that you like
That's
and
a buzzkill.
remember. And it's all about fluidity, You don't want anything to get in the way when that moment.
The most
strikes.
important thing is to have songs. You can have 40 demos sitting on your hard drive. That's not going to get you a gig. That's not going to get you into the studio with anyone. You have to finish songs. And you have to finish songs. That's the most important thing. So my whole thing is how I'm trying to save time all the time. I'm trying to make a lot of music all the time. I'm trying to finish songs all the time. And the reason I got Machine in the beginning was because right out the gate, a lot of the sounds were really good. I could, I would spend way too much time going through and adding compression and limiting and getting the drums to smack. There's certain it's all sound design is super important. You have if you make a song full of a bunch of stock sounds, it's probably going to sound a little generic. My personal way of working is I work with friends that are really good sound designers. They'll bring up Serum or Massive and just make their patch or their lead or their bass line from scratch, and it's awesome. And sometimes I'm a little jealous, but I've just always kind of been more of a I like using Machine. I like using Nexus, Contact, the M1 all the time. I like romplers and samples, and I like post-processing. So I might not be able to dive in too heavily when it comes into sound design from a synth perspective, but I can do some really cool shit with choruses and phasers and EQ and compression. I like sound design from that aspect after the fact, I guess, in a way,
Which is still sound design.
It's totally. But when people talk about sound design, they always talk about. I feel like they always talk about
Making
just
a patch
making
from
your
scratch.
patch from your synth,
Yeah.
and that's cool. I mean, that's amazing. But no one ever talks about using effects as sound design.
I think it's totally a term that you can stretch. The same with a drum machine, right? I mean, we're talking about Machine. Obviously, it has its own sound in a way, right? So you're using an 808 kit in there, but go back 20 years, you would just be using an 808 kit. We wouldn't even have this conversation, I think, in the same way. But I'm interested in the finishing songs because I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. I've never really finished anything. That's why I work in marketing, and I'm not sitting here as a producer.
Don't say that. Come on.
There you go.
It's the hardest.
It's the hardest
thing.
But how do you know when you got going back to the topic of that signature sound or that element in your track that makes you finish a track? When do you know it, or do you just force yourself and say, okay, time's over, this is it?
Well, you have to limit yourself, which is almost contradictory to the age we're living in now, where you have access to everything, with a click.
Exactly. All
You
the
have
time.
To make choices.
You have to
definitive choices.
Yeah, I don't know why I started making beats. For some reason, I was confident in my I've always felt confident in the music I like, so I started DJing because I was like, this is dope. I got to put other people up onto this. And because I had that confidence, I felt like I could make beats. Because all you have to do is be like, that's a cool bass line. Those are cool drums. Like, you have to have the confidence in yourself to make those artistic statements.
Aesthetics. You've built up a palette of things that you like, so you can make choices that are bold and, and shape your sound.
And so I was just kind of like, all right, I'm making the beats almost kind of like DJing. Like, you have to have the courage to like make that artistic statement. Like, I think this is good. And so you just kind of combine a bunch of small decisions until you end up with like a song, essentially.
But then do you alter your signature sound to who you're working with? Like, you had mentioned you recently are working with Diplo and Skrillex. Did you come in saying, I've got to adjust to them, or this is what I do?
I think it's really dependent on the space that you're going into. When I work with those guys, we jam from time to time in LA when they're working on Jack U things, and I'm very much stepping into their space where they are behind the computer. They have their own process. They are the masters of picking a sample library. Everything is open to them to sample. Working with Sonny, for example, I'll be singing something. He goes, sing it into the laptop. So I just bend down into Ableton and just sing it. And he's got it on the keyboard and he's playing me back. And it sounds like this didgeridoo sound because I just went like, and we put it in, we harmonized it, he put a beat around it. So I just become an instrument for him to use in the room. He's in control, you know. If he came into my studio and we're working on something for me, then maybe I'd give him a little, you know, like room to set up, and he'd be going into my Pro Tools and I'd be sampling him. When I had Thundercat play on my last album, and he became this, you know, incredible force, like my favorite bass player, you know. But he became like this living, breathing sample library that I could have him jam over a whole song and then sit there and just take little moments, maybe put them into Machine or my Roland SP404 and play them back as a loop, you know. But so it's very dependent on who is the
so you're
the
kind of
leading force
adjusting.
in the room.
You're adjusting, and the same thing with you, Brenmar?
Yeah, it depends who you're in the session with. Sometimes like. Sometimes I'm in control, and it's sort of like maybe it's more
Someone's
up and
got to be, I think.
Yeah,
you know, leading it.
Yeah, you got to leave the ego. You got to leave the ego at the door. And a lot of times I like to tell whoever I'm working with right when we start the session, like, if you know, I'll play a bunch of beats. I work a lot with rappers. I go to ATL a lot, and I'm always just like, you know, they got no preconceptions about anything. They're just like, next one, next one, next one. You can't take it personal. They either like it or they don't. It doesn't matter. That's why I try to write a lot of beats, because you have to have a lot of beats on deck. Because chances are, I mean, well, like, the more lottery tickets you buy, the better your chances of winning the lottery, right? So the more beats I have on deck, the better my chances of getting that rapper excited. Thus, he starts writing to my song right away. But sometimes I'm working with an up-and-coming vocalist, in which case they might kind of look up to what I'm doing, and anything I say kind of goes. But likewise, like, there's a learning. It's always a back and forth. It's always a back and forth. Like,
but you're on the street, like you are in the cut of what's going on. Even your recent music video. If you guys haven't seen his new music video, it's really good.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it takes place in like an Instagram phone. Your friends. It's really good.
That was born. So I got a new song on Fool's Gold featuring Beat King, who's like the Juicy J of Texas. Man Savage, really dope up-and-coming rapper out of ATL, and this other guy, Jeff Cherry, also from ATL. But I was like, I'm never going to get these three rappers in the same room anytime soon. Like, it's just not going to happen. I'm going to be chasing them for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I was like, man, maybe if I have them film their performances on their iPhones and send it to me, I'll have my video guy who I work with, like, do something. And we just started shooting, like, me and my video guy just kind of, like, started shooting ideas back and forth, and we came upon the idea of, like, having... Well, I also had this artist do the artwork for the single prematurely, because I ended up not using it. But he it's called She Already Know It, as in like, she's a dope ass girl. She already knows it, but she's still on the gram, kind of thirsting. So like, y'all don't know my music. It's kind of it's for the club. I'm telling you.
It makes sense, and that was my next question.
It's party music.
Because you're knowing what's fresh and what's going on. Are you writing for the club?
I wrote that hook. I don't usually write hooks, but I had an idea.
Okay, so you had that in mind.
I'm on Instagram all the time, and I see these thirsty ass girls, and I had an idea had an idea.
Okay, so you had that in mind. So over to Kimbra, like you
I've never heard the term thirsty, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, well maybe not that, but you performed on the Grammys. You won, what is it, Song of the Year or Record of the Year?
Yeah, and
Record of the Year.
Popped you up.
I mean, that was about the biggest platform that you can get. When you wrote that song with Gautier, that was just for fun, or what? Like, what was that process?
Well, I mean, I can't take credit for that song in a way. I mean, I performed on it, but he's a visionary. He's an amazing producer himself, Gautier. And again, he's very particular in knowing exactly what he needs. He has a vision for the song, and they were on the hunt to find the vocalist for that track. So it was a clear thing. And in the same way, you know when you hear it, you know when something feels right. And I guess I got lucky.
Yeah, but I think from that point on, you had the highest. I mean, you can't get any higher than that. She won the record of the year. So
yeah,
and your performance sold it, though. You know what I'm saying? Like,
thank you.
That is still, at the end of the day, like, being able to sell the performance is like half of it.
Well, he's an interesting person to talk about in terms of sound design, because when you're saying like, chorus and effects and reverb and all that stuff, to me, well, Gautier, for example, is all about space. So he's really big on dimension and where you having a vocal that feels right here and super direct, and then elements that are way off in the room. And all of this can sound like technical talk, like who cares, a great song's a great song. But I sort of tend to disagree, because for me, those moments when he's playing me the song and I put the headphones on, I think, am I compelled by this or not? Little choices like that change how you emotionally respond to something. And you can talk about finishing things, for example. I mean, I've pulled up songs, demos, 2, 3, 4 years old.
Yep.
And then I've taken a whole new approach on it, right? I decided to put everything through this filter and maybe take out 10 of the things that were in there.
Like sampling or remixing your own stuff sometimes.
And all of a sudden, it has a whole... So these choices and having these skills in production can be a total game changer for you as a musician or as a producer.
I just cut to a beat that I've been shopping on. I've had on hold. I haven't let go of, because in my head I'm like, this is the coolest loop, but I've just been waiting for the right person to hear it and also kind of think the same thing. So I finally just cut it, but it's like I remember I told the rapper and his manager, I was like, this beat's like 3.5 years old, and they're like, what? Mm-hmm. And they're like, it sounds so now, which was a compliment too, because I was like, all right, that's cool. Maybe it just wasn't meant for the time.
I wrote Settle Down when I was 16. That song you did, that's crazy.
I
have.
It's been sitting there forever.
I think we're kind of pressing for time for a little bit, so I'm going to ask maybe one or two more questions, and then we're going to free it up for Q&A. But when you guys were both talking about the sampling and stuff, downstairs, you were talking about working on your iPad on iMachine, and I want to know, maybe you could explain, when you're not on the computer, or when you're on the computer, how do you sample? Do you go through YouTube? Do you use Soundflower or Audio Hijack or iMachine?
Well, I started off with a lot of hardware, started moving and touring a lot, moved to New York, needed money, sold all my hardware, been working in the laptop primarily for the last 7, 8 years, and it's great. It's the most efficient way of working, but not necessarily the most fun always. So the last 2 years have been me sort of trying to get out the box a little bit, thus Machine, thus Ableton Push, trying to like move, especially the kind of music I make. It's dance music. It's physical music. I can't just be like I mean I can, and I have been for years, just like this for hours, But you gotta kind of like get out of that a little bit. I use Soundflower to sample off the internet. I sample everything. Man, I read John Cage has a book called Silence that I read when I was 16, and like. I feel like music's, to me, the way I thought about music was like everything is potentially available. Like everything is, you can sample and flip anything. And that's cool. Right. That's crazy.
So about you,
still.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought up Cornelius, because I heard him, be a typewriter was the whole beat for the song, and then a raindrop, and, that was like, okay, wow, the game has changed. You don't have to be making music like this. Yeah, so for me, I mean, it's the iPhone. Something as simple as that. I'm always recording. The other day, this guy was telling me a story in an Uber car, and I recorded the whole thing because he had the most beautiful voice. You just think to yourself the same thing, like, it'd come in handy. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just your ear, having it always open. And for me, also just collecting iTunes playlists of songs that I like that have even a snare drum that really inspired me, that I can then pull in audio into my Pro Tools session and build a beat from there.
Right.
Brenmar, you want
open it up?
add something to
some
that?
questions?
I was going to say, well, you brought up the iPad, and I didn't get to talk about that, but the iPad has, like, a lot of people aren't really, I feel like it's out there, and maybe the limitations of the iPad are still, like, apparent, and drives me a little crazy sometimes because I'm trying to do something, and it's not, I can't, or something that I can do in 30 seconds in Ableton will take me, like, 4 or 5 minutes, but the iPad is going to be, like, or is, like mess around with the iPad. Get into
It's
the App
amazing.
Store. Look at some of the apps that people are making to make and like process music. Because there's some really interesting stuff happening on the iPad that I feel is still kind of under the radar a little bit. Like there's I've been doing some really cool stuff recently on the iPad, and I'm speeding up my productivity like crazy. On the train, I'm coming up with loops that I just import as soon as I get to my studio, and I've already cut, an hour or two of like setup time, or trying to do the same loop thing like I've already done it on the airplane ride, or just I'm always trying to I'm trying to make a lot of beats really fast. So and the iPad has been helping me lately do that. So I don't know.
The same
check
thing
out
with the iPhone. If you
the iPhone too, yeah.
yeah, there's an app for Machine on the iPhone and for
Yeah,
the
that's
iPad.
pretty cool.
It's just great. It's come a long way, and you can use all the same sounds.
I use
and
that for
sample.
drums.
Yeah.
So I think we want to open it up, I believe, because
Yeah, absolutely.
Time.
Let's
so
open it up.
does anybody have any questions? I hope. Do we have an extra mic, or you just want to shout out?
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
I guess a question for both of you up there on the couch. Brenmar, you mentioned DJ Dion. I'm from Detroit. What would be what you're listening to right now, either when you're taking a break in the studio or when you need to get amped up before a show, maybe off database records? What would be your cutoff there that you listen to? And then for Kim, you had mentioned doing ratings for your samples and sounds inside of some of the native instrument software. Do you have any specific method for tagging stuff so that you can recall it later, or remembering what you've gone through if you have such a vast library to recall?
Wait, so what was that question?
So what record do you
Two
listen to
questions.
when you want to get amped up before a show?
Yeah, a database. What cut do you listen to when you want to get jacked up or take a pause?
Before you ride that
I mean,
scooter that we talk about, because he's a big scooter rider.
I got it. E-transportation, that's the future.
He's
Get on
into
that. Get your E-boosted skateboard. Honestly, I've been listening to so much Future, I can't even think of anyone else right now that's not Future right now. I've just been Future's been taking me to church. That's all I gotta say about that.
All right, Kimbra.
And you talked about footwork before, but I only just started getting into that Chicago footwork.
R.I.P. DJ Rashad was
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
he was
Well,
a good friend of
I've
mine.
heard a bit of it, but that's kind of what I listen to a lot of Meshuggah, the metal band, and I see a lot of parallels between some metal rhythms and some of the stuff coming out of there, so I get really into that.
Yeah,
Inspired.
it's really experimental. It's
Oh, yeah.
crazy to see that in Chicago, to go to footwork, an actual
Oh, I
footwork
would love
party
to do
battle is
that.
crazy.
Oh,
So
my
cool,
gosh.
so cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hang on.
Oh, sorry. You're next.
Hi, the guy from behind the couch. Sorry, my name
Yeah,
is Felix.
what you doing over there?
Yeah, just a
guy's
very
you just
cozy
woke up.
spot. It's just I didn't get any. Got all dressed up, and then I'm hiding behind the couch.
What's up?
So thanks for doing this. It's great. Kimbra, I just wanted to ask you to maybe take one more look back at 2012, this massive hit. Gautier and his manager even said they lost control over the whole thing at some point. What do you learn from this experience when you look back at the last 4 years, and how has it actually crafted your sound, if it did? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy because so many people have tried to explain how that moment happened, and that they saw it coming. And, of course, it's I heard the song, I was like, it's cool, track number 6 on the album, nice ballad, The fans will really get into it. I had no idea. And neither did he, And I think this is the beauty of, the mystery and the soulfulness and the even spiritual element of us all making music is you never know what's going to kind of connect. And you have a feeling when something's super compelling. So the whole experience of being a part of that and, watching how something can start in a bedroom, which it did. I recorded that vocal tape. We just set up the mic and just went in, So, and watch how these things develop has been really cool and kept the mystery alive for me of making music that, every moment you should honor and kind of treat it like a chance to speak to the world and things can take off in ways you never expected. And on a personal level, it gave me a portal to the world to be able to make my last album with some of my idols, Rich Costi and people like Thundercat and members of the Mars Volta and the Queens of the Stone Age. I mean, my name was on the radar, and that's a huge blessing. We all know how hard it is to get noticed sometimes or get your shit out there. So that was amazing. Yeah.
You have a question? Yeah. You want to just...
All right, thank you. So I have two separate questions for you two. So I'll start with Brenmar first. In today's world, musically, we live in a very cliquish kind of society. For some people doing a lot of experimental music, it's kind of hard to get someone to listen to it. It's almost impossible to get to the ears of, the Red Bull folks here, or native instruments, unless you're somebody who has made it in some way or you're rolling with a certain clique. So what is your take on how such producers, could get their sound out? I'm sure there's many here, who are from New York City who come from the same kind of, background.
When you say experimental, can you just elaborate a little bit on that? Like,
for example,
in what sense?
I create electronic music, but I create Afro electronic music, so it's different. So there's times I play people my music and they're like, "What the f is this?" Like, are you doing like Afro stuff over trap music? What is this? That sounds different. And there's other times I've played music for people that are like, "Oh, that sounds really good," but they have the mentality like, "Oh, if anything Afro-ish, we're just gonna go to Africa. It's all good. You live in New York, you're a G, you're good, man. So. I know there's people here in New York City who are from different cultural backgrounds who are doing a lot of different music inspired by different sounds. I lived in Chicago for a bit too, so I know the juke work you're talking about. That's dope. And I'm sure people run into roadblocks whereby,
definitely
there's a brick wall where they're like,
definitely.
You're not part of.
I mean, I'm still fighting an uphill battle because I've my whole career I've occupied this kind of gray zone where it's like I'm too dance for the hip hop heads, but I'm too hip hop for the dance heads. But I've loved both equally, and my music has always been a little bit of this and a little bit of that. I live in an age where right now in 2016, Justin Bieber and Skrillex, Diplo and Justin Bieber just made this like perfect dance pop song, and in a way are paving the way for an artist like me to maybe get into the studio and play beats, and like now your average R&B singer or rapper will hear them and be like, all right, I know what to do now. It's hard, man, but I guess I've always kind of gone back, and I'm trying to draw from my personal experience to answer your question, because I think I can relate to some of that maybe kind of frustration, sort of like not being enough of this or not being enough of that. I guess ultimately I've always gone back to the fact that like, you have to kind of go back and make sure that you're just still making the music that you like, and that you can't forget why you started making it, because once you start doing something else for reasons unrelated to why you started, which for probably most of us is because we just like really like it, we love whatever genre, you know what I'm saying? Like once that changes, maybe you get a little more successful and maybe you make more money, etc. But like then it's just gonna become another job that you clock in and out of, and I guess as an artist you just have to make that. Like, all right, maybe I'm gonna not necessarily be as famous or make as much money, but I'm always gonna be happy with the music I'm making. And a back catalog of music that you're proud of, no one can ever take that away from you,
And I think that's really the best answer. You have to be fearless and just confident at what you do.
Yeah,
you have to tell the truth.
As long as you just if you really like what you're making, keep doing it. That's like the best answer I could give.
Yeah.
There's no other. You never know who's listening. Finish, keep doing you, finish songs, keep finishing songs and keep releasing them, because even if only 10 people hear them, that's better than 0 people. Right, and one of those 10 people might be a booking agent, might be a label owner, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like, you never know. But like, that's still 10 versus 0. And if you're really happy with it, like ultimately, I think that's really important, because I don't know, you don't want to put something. You don't ever want to like look back at like what you made 2 years ago and be embarrassed by it. You might be like, oh, that's not that good, or like I would do it a little differently now. But ultimately, I think if you're following your true sort of like inner voice, even your old stuff will still resonate. Because I know my stuff does.
Where you were at that
There's like technical stuff that's like, oh, I'm gonna do this way better now, or that snare's out of tune or whatever. But like the idea is still like, I feel like I find producers all the time that are embarrassed because now they're making trap music, and 2 years ago they were making dubstep, and before that they were making glitch house, and before that you know what I'm saying? Like, and it's just like one new trend after another, and like that's a risky. That's a risk. I don't know. I don't want to play that game.
Right.
I ain't trying to play that game.
Yeah, and I know there's many producers and creators who keep making the sound or doing what they're doing. But there's many times there's also baiting from people who say they represent cultures. Like, oh yeah, we represent this upcoming culture or this new next thing. And if you're working with this, come check us out. But when you go with whatever you have that is unique and different, you're not getting that chance, or you're not even getting that ear. So you're just like, okay, I think creators will always create, you know,
Right,
and
right,
that's
right.
gonna go on. Whether it's one or two, it's not
Right.
about money. I don't think most people are in for money. But then when there's a lot of baiting, when people say like, "Oh yeah, we're looking for something that's unique," comes here. So what do you have?
And
you
then
know,
it's like
and then
too unique for them.
yeah, then you run into a brick wall where
Yeah.
you know.
I've had a hard time having A&R guys try to see. I'm like, man, I don't know, like getting the right A&R guys to like see was for like now going back to like Bieber and what and Diplo and them have done. Now it's a little easier because for what I do to like get in the door. But a couple years ago, it just wasn't. I was like, come on, man, people will respond to this because I'm on the street. I see it in the clubs. I see it, you know. But like, yeah, that's a whole nother game though. Like, I don't know. I ultimately
not to cut, just
Sorry.
only because we're under the gun, and if you guys want that open bar, we have to cut it off soon. So.
Okay,
So-
my question for Kimbra
so-
is it's not as deep as that.
Okay, if
just
it's
a
short,
simple-
because we want to
it's
do one
short.
more. So
Yeah. My question for you is, you know, I love your music. I heard of you first, I think, through Pandora or something. And your music is very deep. Does that come from somewhere? Like, what inspires that deepness in your music?
Oh, yes, of course. It comes from a very deep place. It's a sense of duty to create music. It's my language. It's expression for things I can't talk about. So, yeah, I mean, it's the deepest place I can speak from. And just, you know, I think you hit on something super important before about how do I tell my truth and get recognized for it. And, you know, we brought up this Somebody I Used to Know song, which, by the way, broke the mold of all pop music at the time. The chorus doesn't come until like 1 minute 30 or something, you know. You continue to do what you do and speak from a truthful place. I think that deep thing you're talking about, that can speak to people,
Yeah,
you know,
resonates.
and
Yeah.
it's not. It might be 1 in 10, but I'm a big believer in always sticking with what keeps you excited. And
So we have one, well, actually two, if they're really short, because you had to raise your hand and I know everybody wants a question, but
No, this is
that bar's
actually kind of a big shout out for Kimbra. I actually recorded her at Rolling Stone magazine when Settle Down first broke, when you came in, and just seeing your evolution and seeing that. But my question is really, now, are you still using, I think you're using like the Helicon loop pedals and all of that, and are you still performing solo in that capacity?
yeah, I think at the time I was using the iPad.
Yeah, you had a couple iPads.
And the Voice Live
and-
Helicon, yeah. So I've always been attracted to hardware, and that's why I love the Machine Studio as well, because it allows me to have a performance element in the studio. So actually play a live beat down with, you know, with mistakes sometimes, and the ability to quantize. But, you know, be able to play things in, and the Helicon unit is great for that. You can now sync it to the computer, but it's a unit that I think will always stay a part of my setup because of how flexible it is as a live thing to use.
you might want to explain what that is. It's a TC Electronics
Yeah, well, it's
box.
actually a touchpad.
Yeah, it was like
It's
a
not,
little-
people know the loop pedals, but this,
Yeah.
of course, is one that you control with your hands. You can loop. You can now actually, you know, be actually doing live delays and throws and, recording samples and actually pitch shifting them on the fly, all that kind of stuff.
It's a really special way to perform.
Totally, yeah.
All right, one last question, sorry.
Hey, so we're talking about signature sounds, and Brenmar, I listen to a lot of your music. I think that it
Cool, thank
sounds
you.
definitely like you, right? It's very
Definitely, yeah.
identifiable. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about access in terms of how you work with the MCs or the artists that you want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Kimbra, in terms of signature sound, I listen to a lot of metal, like specifically black and death metal, and I make hip hop now, so I don't know how that makes sense. But if
It
you
makes
could
a
talk
lot of sense,
a little
actually.
to that.
There's a ton of crossovers,
Yeah.
you know, on the bottom end. Yeah.
I've been it's actually like amazingly, and I say this like as a sigh of relief because for a long time I listened to a lot of different types of music and didn't try to repeat myself. Every time I sat down in front of the computer or in front of the MPC, it was like, what can I do that I haven't done yet? And that's really fulfilling creatively because I like the idea of experimenting and I like happy accidents and stuff like that. But it makes it really hard to try to build a fan base and and to find your unique sound when you're switching it up every single session. So now I do the complete opposite and I try to repeat the hell out of myself. And yeah, for real. Think about it, man. If Jay-Z came out with a new album and it was full of like slow R&B ballads, we'd be kind of pissed. Like there's a certain expectation that you need to meet because there's just way too much noise, way too much music nowadays. Like when you go to McDonald's in Paris, London, LA, the chicken nuggets all taste the same. You know what I'm saying?
And how do you convert that to the artists that you work with? Because really, I want to know how you get to those people.
I I'm not gonna lie, I put it out there. Well, as a DJ, I'm always trying to kind of make music that I can play in the club. So I always generally try to put that out there. Like, give me something that I can work with in the club. And I also only kind of give them club beats, so I don't really give them much of an option sometimes. Most of the time it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. I've definitely been in the studio with guys that are just, maybe a little more lyrical or are looking for something more than your average, like something that, like, whatever. It's just like different, like someone that's super lyrical, which I am not, like, we're not probably gonna end up with a song that makes sense. It's happened multiple times. But you always take the session because you never know. And I always walk out learning something. There's a psychological aspect to being in the studio with someone too. Like, that's a whole nother thing. I might spend 8 hours in the studio but not touch the laptop or any musical equipment. It's merely about like just talking to the person and trying to get the best performance out of them. I'm not gonna lie, I selfishly always try to get them to come into my world, but when there's resistance, I step into their world, because then it's a chance for me to also grow
Cool.
as a producer,
So maybe you can answer with the hip hop and the black metal comment?
Yeah, well, but I think in relation to the access thing, or how are you, it's about knowing what you do well. And you are the only person that comes from your set of circumstances, background, influences. You're saying that you have the African influence. I've just spent time in Ethiopia and I have this incredible insight into rhythm that I never had before. I come from New Zealand. People don't know Māori music. Only I know that, but I listened to Destiny's Child growing up. And I love Meshuggah. No one else has that palette of influence. But, similar, but only you can do you. It's cheesy, but, So knowing the things that make you unique about that's a good thing to know when you're in the studio as well. Okay, this person wants to work with me. They're drawn to my aesthetic and the way I phrase things, and the way that only I can, in the way that only you can phrase what you can phrase with your set of. And when you get a confidence in that, knowing what your aesthetic is and what, you don't want to become cliche, but it does take time.
At least for me, it took time. I mean, I got my first sampler when I was 15. I've been making beats for like 13, 14 years. A lot of different types of beats, but I guess the beats I'm making now are all kind of the sum of those years in a sense, so no regrets. But like, it takes time. You're not gonna find your sound like overnight, you know what I'm saying? You kind of just have to show up every day. I make music every day, even if it's just like 2 hours, but.
I hate to wrap this up because we could talk all night. I would like to talk all night, but I want you guys to give a big round of applause for Kimbra and Brenmar.
Thank you.
For Constantine, for hosting tonight. You did a great job, Con. There's some really talented people, and I can speak on behalf of NI. We are so happy to have you on our team. So thank you.